coming up on the Empowered Woman podcast.
So optimism bias is where you say you understand that bad things will happen, but you nonetheless also believe that they ain't going to happen to you personally. What I'm asking people to do is challenge your priors. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but we all have biases, and it's important that we need to be mindful of our biases to try to get to truth as much as possible.
Welcome to the Empowered Woman podcast, the #1 show on visibility strategies for women entrepreneurs. If you want to get empowered to be seen, stand out on social media, stages, TV, and more to make an impact with your voice and business, you're in the right place. I'm so glad that you're here. My name is Marcia Spurk, and I'm your host, professional singer and visibility strategist. Welcome again, and let's dive into today's episode.
Professional moms, if you're juggling work, mom guilt, and nightly debates about discipline, meet The Calm and Connected Parent by psychotherapist Todd Sarner. An attachment-first roadmap to unity and calmer homes. Out now. Visit transformativeparenting.com and click New Book at the top for bonuses, details, and updates starting today.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Marta. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, I am super excited to learn from you and also to hear more about you, your story, how you got to where you are. Why don't you kick us off and tell us who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a portfolio manager based in Toronto, Canada, but I'm also a published author. I've written 3 books, and I write articles, and I have a podcast. So I do a number of different things. But my day job, to answer the question most immediately, is I provide discretionary portfolio management services for retail clients throughout Canada, really.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I like a backstory, and I'd love to hear
sure.
more about how you got to where you are. It's always fun to hear the journeys.
Sure. So I did my graduate work in public administration. So I did an undergrad in political studies and a master's in public admin, which is like an MBA but for government. And the program was a co-op program in the nation's capital in Ottawa, and I got a chance to spend some time working on Capitol Hill. And we were doing some research into, on my first work term, I was looking into credit cards. And the credit card rates being charged by companies across the country and gathering the data for the government so they could, disseminate it across various stakeholder groups. And I came to realize that there were a lot of things that I was concerned about in terms of the way the financial services industry was working. And I sort of had this epiphany that I just fell into it that, you know what, I'm a bit of an advocate. I hadn't really thought of myself as being anything like that, but I realized that I was an advocate for consumers, and that a lot of consumers were being harmed by what they didn't know and what they were presumptively led to know. But they were nonetheless. I'm not suggesting the financial services industry is immoral, but I would say it's amoral, which is to say it'll do what it has to do to make its money, and if that means giving you a sales pitch, then you're going to get a sales pitch, and it's a lot of information that can be leading or can be detrimental, but they're not going to help you find a better way to do things because they're fat and happy and making money doing things the way they've always been done. So that was how I came to the realization, and then I moved to Toronto, where I live now, and wanted to find a way to work in the government, but there were no jobs in the government, in the public sector at the time. There was a hiring freeze that went on. And so I thought, life hands you a lemon, you make lemonade. And I had a skill set. I understood economics and accounting and marketing and geopolitics and various things. And these are all things that are transferable when you give advice to retail clients on the investment side. And so I took my degree, which I'm one of the relatively few people who ends up working on Bay Street, which is the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street, starting out thinking he was going to be working in government. But here I am.
Oh my goodness, what a journey. And I love the whole piece of you didn't think you were going to be an advocate, but once you started doing the research and seeing this stuff, you were like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of potentially misleading things, and you could be a voice there to help out and make a difference. That's awesome. I love that. Can you tell us more about your books? I know there's one in particular we want to chat about and like the specific terminology, but tell me more about the books.
Okay, so I've written 3 books. The first book was called The Professional Financial Advisor, and it was a treatise on how people who give advice should be more professional, the way doctors, dentists, lawyers, and accountants are professional, with just a charging fees, not commissions, being more transparent, being fiduciaries, just an advocacy for people who do what I do for a living to raise the bar.
Okay.
That was my first book. Then my second book was called Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry. And that was a little bit about what we were talking about already, sort of standing up for consumers. But there was some research that was released that I used as a jumping off point for the book that showed that people who had a mutual fund license here in Canada, which is about 3/4 of all advisors, believed things that were demonstrably untrue. And they believed them even though they had good intentions, like they weren't trying to do anything harmful. They just believed things that were not true. And the question that it then begs is, well, how do we disabuse people of false beliefs, which is a fairly relevant theme in 2025 as well, because misinformation and disinformation have become buzzwords that we're all very familiar with. So I was writing about that many, many years ago. I think that book came out in 2019. Finally, my third book, Bullshift, came out in 2023. So it's about the subtitle is How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. And the way that I position it is, it's how the financial services industry shifts your attention to make you feel bullish. So it's a portmanteau. You're just taking two ideas, bullishness and shifting, putting them together to make a word that doesn't sound at all like any other word. And getting people's attention when they walk past it in the bookstore or when they're browsing on Amazon, right? So, so the real concern here, I will take one moment to explain what the main why Bullshift is important, because right now governments are doing everything they can to keep people feeling happy, to not contemplate how risky things are. And in the U.S. in particular, we're looking at a cyclically adjusted price earnings ratio that's over 40, which is the second highest it's been ever. The market is expensive. So-called Buffett indicator at 220, which is the absolute highest it's been ever. A debt level at $38 trillion, the highest it's been ever, and certainly the highest in peacetime. The debt to GDP ratio, highest ever. So we got a whole bunch of alarm bells that are ringing saying you should be worried. But there's this AI boom going on, and people are optimistic. And the similarity between people who give advice to retail clients, people like me, and people in government, people in my original career of choice, have this in common. They do well, especially if you're the government in power, the party in power, and advisors do well when their clients, be they voters or investors, are feeling good about things. As long as people are feeling good, they'll give you their money to invest and they'll give you their vote. And so there's a built-in, baked-in predisposition to be positive at all times. And I'm not negative. I'm an optimistic person, but I'm concerned about optimism bias. So the problem is, like 19 times out of 20, optimism is a good thing. But what about the one time out of 20 when you really ought to step back and say, hey, wait a minute, maybe I should take off the rose-colored glasses and consider things a little more completely. So I would say that we're in that sort of a situation right now. So I'll give you an example, Marta. Let's say, I don't know if you know the statistics, but what percentage of people in North America end up getting divorced? If you get married, what percentage of marriages end in divorce? Do you know?
I have no idea. I've heard it, but I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Right. Nobody knows off the top of their head. But
Yeah.
most people, if you ask them to guess, and you were very kind, you didn't want to guess and look silly, most people know that the number is somewhere around 40 or 50%, a little less than half.
Okay.
So people know that. Intuitively, people know that the odds of a marriage ending in divorce is almost half. If you ask newlyweds on their wedding day, what are the odds that you're going to get divorced? They know the odds. They know that 40 or 50% of the people who get married will get divorced. But if you ask them, they will all say, every single one of them will say, well, yeah, but not me. So optimism bias is where you say you understand that bad things will happen, but you nonetheless also believe that they ain't going to happen to you personally. And that's dangerous because, markets tumble. Well, markets are going to tumble, but somehow I'm going to make it through that. Well, maybe, but I frankly doubt it. What makes you so special? So that's what Bullshift is about.
Okay. Oh my gosh. I love that example. It makes me think about the lottery too, the statistics of how many people can win the lottery and they're still buying tickets. And yeah, it's interesting how the human mind operates. Well, I like that you mentioned one of your books talked about helping advisors or people, that advise, especially financially, on how to give better advice, just like doctors, dentists, etc.
And why do you think advisors can maybe be misguided in this scope, whether right now or?
Okay, so I'll start by explaining what the misguided beliefs are, and then I'll give you some examples as to what you can do about it. So there was a research paper that was released way back in 2016. It's 9 years old now.
Hmm.
And it showed that in Canada, and it was a massive, massive sample size, like 10 or 15,000 advisors and hundreds of thousands of clients going back like 1 or 2 decades. Like the sample size was just enormous. So a very, very statistically significant body of work that we're looking at here. And what the research showed was that financial advisors chased past performance, ran concentrated positions, and didn't pay attention to product cost. Now, these are three things that most ordinary investors would say, well, wait a minute. The prospectus I ever see says that past performance shouldn't be relied upon and may not be repeated. And everyone knows that cost is important, and everyone knows we should diversify. So why are financial advisors doing these things that people that are not even in the business intuitively just know are wrong? So it's a curious question. And so right away, everyone guesses, well, it's because of misplaced agency. It's because they found a way. They think they can make an extra buck by, oh, I'm going to recommend this high cost product and I buy it myself because that'll make it easier for me to recommend to my clients. And they think there's more money in it for them. But in fact, what this research showed was that financial advisors did this even with their own accounts and even after they retired from the business. So there was no ulterior motive. They seemed to be doing it because they believed it was the right thing to do. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, why is that? And it seems to be rooted in social psychology. So there was research done by these guys, Leon Festinger and Solomon Asch, and how people conform. And if you start thinking about how people are just following orders and just trying to fit in with their peers, well, it turns out that a lot of people who give advice have just always given advice the same way. And a lot of people don't realize how the industry is presupposed into getting people to think a certain way because it's good for business, but it's not good for investors. The problem is even the advisors themselves don't realize that they've been caught in the net, and they give bad advice despite having good intentions. And again, I want to be very clear. It's not because they don't have good intentions. They do. But in some ways, that's worse. Because on the one hand, well, if they're nefarious, if they're doing something sneaky, we can catch them and put them in jail and blah, blah, blah. But if they don't even realize they're doing something wrong and they have good intentions, it's sort of like the call is coming from within the house. We have a problem that we can't even it's very difficult to fix. Mark Twain has a saying that it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so.
Yeah.
And so there are people who think they know things for sure that just ain't so. By the way, I got a lovely story about that quote. It's apocryphal. It's attributed to Twain, but in fact, if you ask people who said that, they'll say, oh, Mark Twain said that. The funny thing is that there's no evidence that Twain ever said it. So people know for sure that Twain said it, but it just ain't so. So ironically, the quote actually serves as a demonstration of what the quote is telling you about. So, that's what the problem is.
Okay. Well, and you said it's hard to fix something when you don't even know that there is a problem. So what are some questions that these investors should be asking themselves? Like, what can they do then to make sure that they know? Hey, let me ask you a question. Would you like to be my next guest on the Empowered Woman podcast? Do you have a story you'd like to share? Want more visibility for your business on a show ranked in the top 0.5% in the world? Well, then head on over to martasburke.com/podcast guest for more information.
So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So of course, the next question is, okay, so if it is broke, but you don't know it's broke, what do you do about that? And that's a much tougher nut to crack. So I've got dozens of questions in my second book, and Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry, that actually give people, line and verse. This is the question you should ask. You might feel sheepish about it. And this is the sort of answer you should be looking for. So the broad generic answer to your question, Marta, is decision hygiene. You have to challenge your own assumptions. You should, when you hear something or when you read something, instead of just accepting it as being true, see if you can actually find some evidence to prove it to be false. There's this, so a lot of people don't like to look for things that are disproving what they already know. It's called cognitive dissonance. You don't want to actually be proven wrong. People don't like to be proven wrong. But if you want to give good advice, or if you want to make better wealth decisions, which is what my podcast is called,
Yeah.
then you need to be vigilant in defending against things that you think are true, that seem to be true, but that you never really challenged, and look under the hood to see if it really is in fact passing muster. So this decision hygiene is the phrase that I want to use. Checking your biases, actively arguing against your priors, and thinking about, okay, I know that's what I thought was true, but is that really the way things work? And let's just check. Let's see if we can do some research.
Yeah.
And it's called, the phrase that people use is confirmation bias.
Mm.
So when you are given a question, research shows this. If you're given a question and you want something to be the answer, and you Google the question, people will literally look at the first answer, the headline, if there's like 8 or 10 newspaper articles about the subject that seems to confirm what they thought, and they'll click on that one and say, see, I did some research, and it says it doesn't matter if the other 8 or 9 articles say that that's not true. You will actively seek out something that confirms your priors, as opposed to something that actively challenges your priors. And so what I'm asking people to do is challenge your priors. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but we all have biases, and it's important that we need to be mindful of our biases to try to get to truth as much as possible.
That's a good practice. I like decision hygiene. I don't think I'd ever heard of that before, but that's smart. I like it. Tell us more about your podcast. So you mentioned the name. What kind of topics do you cover? Do you have guests?
Yeah, so I do. It's called Make Better Wealth Decisions. It comes out every Thursday. It's about the same length as yours, 24, 25 minutes an episode. I have a different guest every week, and we talk about things that are that have to do with financial decision making. It might be about a product and how it fits into your portfolio. It might be about a tax strategy. I interview academics. I interview journalists. I interview regulators, thought leaders, consultants, a whole wide variety, because I want to come at it from decision making is the sort of thing that there's no one single best way to do it. So I try to come at making decisions in personal finance in a way that's fun, in a way that's approachable, but hopefully you learn something and you can apply it. You don't just learn something like you learn it in a textbook. You can actually take it home and, most weeks apply it to the way you go about doing your investing.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. We'll make sure and put that in the show notes. So besides your books, people can dive deeper by listening to the conversations on your podcast. That's great. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, in working with so many clients and in being an advocate for bringing more truth and less misinformation, especially in the financial space, I'd love to hear some stories. Is there any story of a client that you helped, or maybe a financial advisor that you helped, either in terms of a feedback from the book or somebody that you worked directly with? Anything that comes top of mind that you'd like to share with us?
I'll tell you a story about why it's important to work with a portfolio manager, a person who has discretion. So there's a relatively small subset of advisors who you make sure that you understand the risk return characteristics of the client, and then you give the advisor the money, and the advisor just manages the portfolio without calling to say, I think we should sell 200 shares of that and use the money to buy 150 shares of the other thing. There's none of that. The advisor just manages the money. So back in the global financial crisis in 2000, and mostly in 2008 and into 2009, when things went really haywire because of subprime mortgages, markets were dropping a lot. The stock market in particular was dropping a lot. And I had something in place called an investment policy statement with all of my clients. So this is in writing. It's a blueprint. This is what our portfolio is going to look like. It's 60% stocks and 40% bonds, and it's going to be diversified, different corporate bonds and government bonds, and stocks from different parts of the world and so forth. Well, we agreed that 60-40 is the target, as an example. Some were 70-30, but whatever. We agreed that whenever things got out of whack, we would buy low and sell high. So when 60-40 becomes 50-50, because stocks are down by a third, and your $1 million portfolio is only worth $800,000 because your $600,000 in stocks are now only worth $400,000, you're supposed to sell some of your bonds to buy some stocks to get back to 60-40. And I had a pre-commitment in writing from all my clients. And guess what? They didn't want to do it. They went, I know, you can't do that. I don't want to do that, because they were scared, because they were making emotional decisions, or non-decisions. If you choose not to decide, you've still made a choice, as Rush would say.
Mm-hmm.
So they made the decision to not act because they were caught like a deer in the headlights, and they didn't want to throw good money after bad, as it were. So what I have learned is that you can help people a lot by helping and telling them that, look, I know what I'm doing, and you're your own worst enemy, and you can get in the way by making emotional decisions and making it difficult for me to do what I have to do. If you give me discretion, which is what I asked for after the global financial crisis, so I became a portfolio manager in 2009, precisely because I didn't want to have to relive that experience, so that now when stocks are down, I can just sell other things and buy more stocks. Or when stocks are up, I can sell a little bit to trim and take some profits and bring the risk back in line with the target. But I don't have to call every client all the time. So when you start talking about decision making, sometimes it's best to let the pros who have a fiduciary obligation to do what's right for the client to do it, and you can do it en masse, and you don't have to call every client and agree on every little detail and then execute quickly. You can just do what's right, do the right thing for everyone at once, at the same time, at the same price, and it's just easy peasy. So that's a lot better. So that's something that I learned about how you could give advice and how you can help people make better wealth decisions by basically not letting them make the decision, by saying, no, no, I know what I'm doing. Let me make the decision for you so that we don't have to get gummed up like we did last time.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Cool. Well, thanks so much for sharing. Well, before I have you tell us where you hang out the most, obviously we have the podcast, we have the books, but in terms of social media, I like asking all of my guests what I call my $1 million question, but in your case, it should be billions and trillions. Typically, because the name of the show is The Empowered Woman, I ask, what is an empowered woman? But for my guy guests, I ask, what is an empowered human? So what is it?
Okay. I would say I'm going to touch on what I said earlier, Marta. An empowered human is one who is self-aware, who makes decisions in full contemplation of what's right and what's wrong. And we all have self-interest. We all have things that we want in life. But to the extent that you can suspend your self-interest at least a little bit in order to try to make a decision based on what is right and what is true, as opposed to what's best for me personally. And I'm not suggesting you can't do what's good for you personally, but hopefully there's an intersection, and that what's best for you and what's true is the same thing.
Yeah.
But a lot of people will simply do what's easy and what's self-interested, as opposed to thinking about, well, how does this affect my spouse? How does this affect my children or my coworkers or whatever else? And if you can make a more informed decision, sometimes there's a third way. There's something which is maybe not unambiguously best, but also not ambiguously brazenly self-interested, something that, is a compromise that makes everyone feel at least that they weren't being harmed in the process. So that's all part of what we said earlier. It's decision hygiene, but decision hygiene requires self-awareness and careful reflection about what our own biases are in the first place, and that's hard.
It is hard. And typically the best things for us are harder anyway, because we tend to go, in general terms, path of least resistance or self-interest, like what you were saying. But that's good. I like that. Well, tell us how we can find you. Where do you hang out these days?
So great. Thanks for asking. My website is johndegoey.ca. So JOHNDEGOEY.ca. And my podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. My books are available anywhere you go in Barnes and Noble or Amazon. The books that I think that you should be most interested in is Bullshift, which is the one that's over my corner right there. That's the one about optimism bias. And I think that's the one that is especially, I'm going to just talk about that one. That is the one that I think is the most urgent. If you're only going to get one book, I think you should get Bullshift, because it is extremely apropos to what's going on in the world right now. There are a lot of people that are being shifted or being bullshifted into believing things that are not necessarily true, or that are not exactly true. And you need to think about things more in a more robust, complete, fulsome sort of manner, as opposed to, well, this feels good, so I'm just going to do that. Yeah, if you just fall into this feels good, you're probably going to make a decision that feels good in the moment, but you're going to be regretting in the fullness of time.
Yeah, Oh, that's so good. Thank you so much. I'll make sure and put all that in the show notes. So much food for thought with your with this interview. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope this episode empowered you. And if you enjoyed the show, please join the Empowered Woman community on Facebook and share with friends or leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover this empowering message. Until next time, bye.